She was the rebellious royal, a woman of glamour, controversy, and undeniable charisma. From dazzling high society to stirring headlines with her romances, Princess Margaret, the sister of Queen Elizabeth II, was never one to follow the rules. But beneath the sparkling tiaras and opulent lifestyle was a deeply complex figure, torn between duty and desire, tradition and rebellion. In today's video, we'll explore the life of Princess Margaret, the royal who dared to be different. Princess Margaret was born at 9:22 p.m. on August 21, 1930, at Glamis Castle in Scotland, her mother's ancestral home, and was affectionately known as Margot within the royal family. She was the first member of the royal family in direct line of succession to be born in Scotland since the 1600s and was delivered by Sir Henry Simpson, the royal obstetrician. At the time of her birth, Margaret was fourth in line to the British throne. She was the younger daughter of Prince Albert, Duke of York, who later became King George VI, and Elizabeth, Duchess of York, who later became Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Her father was the second son of King George V and Queen Mary, while her mother was the youngest daughter of Claude Bowes-Lyon, 14th Earl of Strathmore and Kinghorn, and Cecilia Bowes-Lyon, Countess of Strathmore and Kinghorn. The Duchess of York initially wanted to name her second daughter Anne Margaret, but ultimately named her Margaret Rose. Margaret's early life was spent primarily at the Yorks' residences at 145 Piccadilly in London and Royal Lodge in Windsor. The Yorks were perceived by the public as an ideal family, but unfounded rumors that Margaret was deaf and mute were not completely dispelled until her first main public appearance at her uncle Prince George's wedding in 1934. She was educated alongside her sister Elizabeth by their Scottish governess, Marion Crawford. Margaret's education was mainly supervised by her mother, who did not aim at bringing her daughters up to be more than nicely behaved young ladies. Although there was a belief in the importance of education, the Duchess of York commented that she and her sisters had only governesses and still married well. Margaret resented her limited education, especially in later years, and criticized her mother for it. However, her mother expressed regret that her daughters did not go to school like other children, and the employment of a governess rather than sending the girls to school may have been at the insistence of their grandfather, George J. M. Barry, the author of Peter Pan, read stories to the sisters as children. Margaret's grandfather died in January 1936, and her uncle ascended to the throne as Edward VIII. Less than a year later, in December 1936, Edward abdicated to marry Wallis Simpson, a twice-divorced American whom neither the Church of England nor the Dominion governments would accept as queen. Edward's abdication made Margaret's father reluctantly assume the throne, and Margaret became second in line to the throne, with the title the Princess Margaret to indicate her status as a child of the sovereign. The family moved into Buckingham Palace, and Margaret's room overlooked the Mall. Margaret was a brownie in the first Buckingham Palace Brownie Pack, formed in 1937. She was also a Girl Guide and later a Sea Ranger. She served as president of Girl Guiding UK from 1965 until her death on February 9, 2002. At the outbreak of World War II, Princesses Margaret and Elizabeth were at Birk Hall on the Balmoral Castle estate, where they stayed until Christmas 1939, enduring nights so cold that drinking water in carafes by their bedside froze. They spent Christmas at Sandringham House before moving to Windsor Castle, just outside London, for much of the remainder of the war. Their mother famously insisted that the children would not go without her, and she would not leave without the king. At Windsor, the princesses staged pantomimes at Christmas in aid of the Queen's Wool Fund, which bought yarn to knit into military garments. In 1940, Margaret sat next to Elizabeth during their radio broadcast for the BBC's Children's Hour, addressing other children who had been evacuated from cities. Margaret spoke at the end by wishing all the children good night. Unlike other members of the royal family, Margaret was not expected to undertake any public or official duties during the war. She developed her skills in singing and playing the piano, often performing show tunes from stage musicals. Her contemporaries thought she was spoiled by her parents, especially her father, who allowed her to take liberties not usually permissible. such as being allowed to stay up to dinner at the age of 13. Crawford despaired at the attention Margaret received, writing to friends that Princess Margaret drew all the attention while Princess Elizabeth let her do that. Elizabeth did not mind this and found it easier when Margaret was around, as everyone laughed at what Margaret said. Their father described Elizabeth as his pride and Margaret as his joy. When Elizabeth joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service in 1945, Margaret became extremely jealous, lamenting that she was born too late, as she was too young to join herself. At the end of World War II in 1945, Princess Margaret appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace alongside her family and Winston Churchill. Following the celebrations, both Margaret and her sister Elizabeth joined the crowds outside the palace incognito, chanting for the King and Queen and participating in festivities like the Hokey Cokey and the Lambeth Walk. Elizabeth later recalled the joyful experience, highlighting their fear of being recognized while mingling with the public. On April 15, 1946, Margaret was confirmed into the Church of England. On the February 1, 1947, she embarked on a state tour of southern Africa with Elizabeth and their parents. This 3-month visit was Margaret's first trip abroad, which she later described as unforgettable. Peter Townsend, the king's equerry, accompanied her as a chaperone. Margaret later served as a bridesmaid at Elizabeth's wedding to Philip Mountbatten in November 1947. As Elizabeth and Philip welcomed 2 children, Prince Charles and Princess Anne, Margaret found herself moving further down the line of succession. In 1950, former royal governess Marion Crawford published an unauthorized biography titled The Little Princesses, which featured stories about Margaret's lively and mischievous nature. Around the time of Elizabeth's wedding, Margaret's social life began attracting media attention due to her vivacious reputation. She became known for her beauty and glamour, socializing with high society and a group of friends dubbed the Margaret Set. Her official engagements increased, including a tour of Italy, Switzerland, and France, as she also became involved in several charitable organizations. As she approached her late 20s, the press shifted its narrative from romantic possibilities to speculating about her remaining single. Throughout the late 1940s and into the 1950s, the press intensely scrutinized Margaret's personal life, referring to her as one of the world's most eligible bachelorettes. She was linked romantically to over 30 bachelors, including notable figures such as David Mountbatten and future Canadian Prime Minister John Turner. Among them, Billy Wallace, an heir to a significant fortune, was considered a favored companion. In 1951, during her 21st birthday celebrations at Balmoral, the press was disappointed to capture only her with Townsend, who had become a familiar figure in her life, serving as a safe companion during royal appearances. Shortly after, her father underwent lung cancer surgery, leading to Margaret temporarily taking on royal duties. He passed away in February 1952, after which her sister ascended to the throne as Elizabeth II. The relationship between Margaret and Peter Townsend, which began during the war, was complex. The king had suggested appointing skilled military personnel, leading to Townsend becoming the new equerry at Buckingham Palace in 1944. Both princesses were drawn to him, though Margaret was initially only 13. Townsend's position became permanent, and the king and queen grew fond of him. Margaret developed feelings for Townsend during their South Africa tour in 1947, and their relationship became more evident in the early 1950s after his marriage ended. After the death of her father, Margaret was comforted by her faith and returned to public life by June 1952. Townsend's position in the Queen Mother's household allowed for their continued interaction, and by August of that year, rumors of their romance began to surface. Townsend eventually proposed to Margaret, and while she accepted, the couple faced significant opposition. Queen Elizabeth was advised to ask Margaret to wait for a year due to the complications surrounding their potential marriage, which was considered a constitutional crisis. Churchill's cabinet and the Archbishop of Canterbury did not approve of the marriage, and public opinion was divided. While many supported Margaret's right to marry whom she chose, substantial opposition existed regarding the implications for the monarchy. As the situation developed, Margaret and Townsend were advised to wait until she turned 25, which would allow her to marry without the Queen's permission. While Townsend was reassigned to Brussels, the couple maintained communication through letters and phone calls. Despite their separation, Margaret's public appearances continued, where she often dated other men. Ultimately, the press maintained interest in their romance as Margaret navigated her royal duties and personal life amidst the scrutiny of her relationships. As Margaret's 25th birthday approached, speculation surrounding an engagement announcement intensified. In January 1955, as the pressures mounted, Margaret began traveling to the Caribbean, seeking respite from the overwhelming media attention and public scrutiny. In April 1955, Townsend broke his silence, expressing frustration at being kept in the shadows and asserting that he believed their love would endure against public and familial opposition. This moment marked a turning point in their relationship, with both parties feeling the strain of their circumstances. The couple's public appearances began to increase, drawing even more media attention. By October 12, 1955, Townsend returned to Britain, and the two officially began courting at gatherings hosted by friends. However, despite the media frenzy, no official announcement regarding their engagement was made, leading to widespread confusion and speculation. Some insiders believed that Margaret hesitated about marrying Townsend due to her responsibilities and the implications of marrying a divorced man. In a private letter to Prime Minister Anthony Eden, she expressed her uncertainty about their future together, revealing the emotional turmoil she was experiencing. Editorials and public opinion warned that a marriage to a divorced man could jeopardize her royal duties, intensifying the pressure on her to make a decision. Documents later released indicated that there was a government plan to amend the 1772 Act, which would have allowed Margaret to marry Townsend without losing her royal status. However, this proposal was not communicated to her in time to affect her decision. Ultimately, on October 31, 1955, Margaret issued a public statement declaring that she would not marry Townsend, citing her commitment to the Church and the Commonwealth as her guiding principles. This decision left her feeling drained and demoralized, yet both she and Townsend expressed relief at finally laying their burdens down. After her separation from Townsend, Margaret briefly considered marrying Billy Wallace, but ultimately met and married photographer Anthony Armstrong Jones in May 1960. Their wedding marked a significant moment in royal history, as it was the first royal ceremony broadcast on television, attracting a global audience and a wide array of public interest. Princess Margaret wore a stunning wedding dress designed by Norman Hartnell. The dress is celebrated for its elegant simplicity and modern design, marking a significant moment in royal fashion. The gown was made of white silk organza and featured a tailored tube with a fitted waist and long sleeves. The bodice had a lightly transparent jacket style with button details on the cuffs, which added a touch of sophistication. The full-length skirt was voluminous, made from 30 meters of fabric, and ended with a small train, which was beautifully complemented by a tulle veil bordered in satin. One of the most remarkable aspects of this gown is its minimalism, unlike many traditional royal wedding dresses, which are often adorned with elaborate embellishments. Margaret's dress had very little decoration, allowing the silhouette to make a bold statement on its own. The decision to forego the usual pearls and crystals in favor of simplicity was revolutionary for the time. Margaret wore the Poltimore tiara with her gown, which she acquired just before her wedding. This stunning tiara enhanced the elegance of her overall. Ocand became one of the iconic pieces associated with her bridal ensemble. The tiara's design and history added a layer of significance to her wedding attire. Norman Hartnell, who designed the dress, had a long-standing relationship with the royal family and had dressed royal women for major events for decades. However, like her relationship with Townsend, Margaret's marriage to Armstrong Jones was fraught with difficulties. Both she and her husband engaged in extramarital affairs, which contributed to a growing rift in their marriage. Margaret's affairs were particularly notable. She had relationships with various men, including her daughter's godfather and prominent figures such as Robin Douglas Home. The couple's marriage continued to deteriorate, and by the early 1970s, they had largely drifted apart. They had 2 children together, Sarah and David. In the midst of her marital troubles, Margaret began a significant relationship with Roddy Llewellyn, a man 17 years her junior. This relationship marked a pivotal chapter in Margaret's life, illustrating her ongoing struggle between royal duty and personal happiness. Llewellyn became a source of comfort and companionship for Margaret. Princess Margaret's later years were overshadowed by a series of health challenges and personal struggles. A heavy smoker since her late teens, Margaret continued this habit for many years, which significantly impacted her health. By the 1970s, she had experienced a nervous breakdown and sought treatment for depression at the Priory Clinic, reflecting the psychological toll of her royal duties and personal life. Additionally, she faced a range of physical ailments, including migraines, laryngitis, and bronchitis. Further complicating her well-being, in January 1980, she underwent surgery at the London clinic to remove a benign skin lesion, marking the beginning of a series of significant medical procedures. Margaret and her husband separated in 1976, and the marriage ended in divorce in 1978. On January 5, 1985, Margaret had part of her left lung removed, a procedure that drew parallels to her father's similar surgery 34 years earlier. Although she quit smoking either in 1991 or January 1993, reports persisted that cigarette smoke was still detectable in her residence, suggesting she may have continued to smoke in secret. Additionally, she struggled with alcohol consumption, which contributed to her deteriorating health. Margaret's health continued to decline in the early 1990s. In January 1993, she was hospitalized for pneumonia, and on February 23, 1998, she suffered a mild stroke while at her holiday home in Mustique. The following year, a serious bathroom accident resulted in severe scalds to her feet, which impaired her mobility, necessitating the use of a wheelchair and support while walking. By January 10, 2001, she was hospitalized again due to appetite loss and swallowing difficulties following another stroke. By March 2001, the cumulative effects of multiple strokes left her with partial vision and paralysis on her left side, significantly affecting her quality of life. On February 9, 2002, at the age of 71, Princess Margaret passed away in her sleep at King Edward VII's Hospital in London, just 3 days after the 50th anniversary of her father's death. The day prior, she had suffered another stroke, which was compounded by cardiac complications. Following her death, tributes poured in from family members, including Prince Charles, and condolences were offered by UK politicians and foreign leaders.